Delighted to be with you this afternoon. So welcome to our CIMR debates in public policy. Our topic today is accelerating inclusive innovation, entrepreneurship and financing to support minority SME businesses. I have to say we are so lucky to be joined by such a distinguished panel this afternoon, and I will introduce them shortly, but I just want to go through a little bit of what we're going to be looking at today in the theme of our session. So this debate in public policy, academia and practice will address the issue of why there are still so many barriers to inclusive innovation within innovation, entrepreneurship and finance for small businesses, especially from entrepreneurs from minority backgrounds, amongst others, of course. The 2020 report by the British Business Bank, Alone Together, shows these are even more pronounced for women from minority backgrounds. Our esteemed panel will draw on their professional experience. They will debate the nature, the causes and solutions for this issue. The panel is drawn from academia, policy and business, and the debate will inform and challenge existing practice within this ecosystem. We have a packed agenda. I'm going to introduce our panel members very briefly, in part because they have such extensive bios. It would take up a significant time of the session to do so. So I'm going to welcome initially Eugene. Now, if I pronounce this incorrectly, Eugene, I apologise in advance. Nizeyimana is the CEO of the SSCG, consulting and CEO also of the African Business Chamber. Emma Obanye is our practice to this session today, a wonderful entrepreneur. She's an advisor, a mentor, and as she says herself, a tech geek from Hackney. Monder, Professor Monder, OBE, is the director of the Centre for Research in Ethnic Minority Entrepreneurship. He is a leading authority on small businesses and ethnic minority entrepreneurship. Fiona Murill. Fiona is a senior manager and economist at the British Business Bank. And Colette Henry, who will be our discussant for this session, is the head of Department of Business Studies at Dundalk Institute of Technology in Ireland, and many other notable academic, business and policy positions. So thank you to everyone for joining us today. We also have on our session today Professor Helen Lawton-Smith, who will be concluding our session today, and you'll see Helen later. So what we're really wanting to do is get into the rich detail of this session. So I'm not going to take any further time with the intro, and I'm going to go straight on to our first panel member. Each panel member has been asked the same question, and I'm going to read that for you now. So literally our panel has been, and I've just lost it, which isn't helpful. Excuse me. So we've asked our panel members to give us their reflections on the key things that are required to accelerate inclusive innovation, entrepreneurship and finance to support minority SME businesses. And we've asked them to include intersectionality within their address today. So first of all, I'm going to welcome Eugene, our first panelist, to share his thoughts with us today.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Yes, thank you so much, Grace. Thank you for the opportunity to join you and to be on this discussion panel. So my name is Eugene Nizeyimana. I'm the co-founder and the CEO of the African Business Chamber. And just before I start, for those who doesn't know, African Business Chamber is the organization that represents the interest of African business community in the UK, the same way you have Asian Chamber of Commerce or British Chamber of Commerce. So we set up the organization because we felt we didn't have an organization that represents African community businesses in the UK economy. So just to clarify a few things, one, when I use the word African, is the representation the way we say European, Asian. So we represent all African communities in the UK. So white African, Asian African, same way say American and all those. The second thing, especially for this discussion, I also would like to clarify that the word minority SME businesses that we've used is a very broad word. So kind of, it will be good to appreciate that not all minority face the same challenges. So minorities include Asian minorities, Jewish minority, East European. Some of these minorities are thriving and are doing well in the economy. Unlike their peers, especially the one at the bottom of the pyramid, they remain mainly Black and African. So, and that's why I'm going to concentrate on. So when it comes to inclusive innovation, specifically, I think one of the things we need to address is to demystify the meaning of innovation, or to understand innovation more broadly, because currently innovation tend to be associated with Silicon Valley entrepreneurs launching and tech innovation to address global issue. And like, we should look more innovation broadly into other things like service that work to improve the representation of certain community, or technology that empower certain community like minority or disabled, or repurposing resources, or doing the things differently. So innovation should be looked at it. And I'm basing this one based on my experience and some of the work I did with Innovate UK, where I found the issues around how we define innovation or how we see innovation. The second thing is also to appreciate and understand that specifically African and minority businesses tend to operate in non-innovation driven sector. So these are either like hair economy, food and drink, transport, or certain sectors like creative, or sectors that don't tend to adopt a lot of technology or innovation, but they are still innovating in certain way. So majority of them, you find them in healthcare, security, but they are still doing some certain innovation. And also we need to understand one of the key issues I found out with some of the work. I used to sit on the Innovate UK as an innovation fund review. And one of the challenges we found, especially women innovation, where we had only one Black woman out of 50 succeeding in terms of securing grant. And I was given an opportunity to review some of the application. And one of the challenges I find within the minority is how we put our story together. Some of the minority, especially African or whatever, English is not their first language. They might have a good concept, a good idea, but the way they put their story or package their pitch doesn't go well with the specific. When it comes to entrepreneurship, of course, some of the things that and some work we are doing in terms of entrepreneurship is about how do we define the characteristic behavior of the African communities in terms of businesses. And this is a big issue, especially how they think, their attitude to risk, to business. For example, Black British don't think the same as Nigerian, or Nigerian don't think the same as Kenyan. Kenyan don't think the same as South African. All communities, because of the cultural differences, think differently. Some are more entrepreneurial than others. Nigerian are more entrepreneurial than Kenyan or Rwandese or different communities. The second thing is about how we engage in the ecosystem. Certain communities, the minorities, let's say Somalis, they don't like to engage in the ecosystem like other entrepreneurs. So it's how do we help them to feel confident to engage and participate in the ecosystem. And then those also affect the attitude to risk, attitudes to self-employment. Some communities prefer being employed. And finally, I know I don't want to take much time, is about finance. Finance, of course, remain a big challenge to the minority sector, especially Black and African. We continue to be subject to heavy scrutinization when it comes to application of loan. Second thing is lack of data within the financial sector. So we've identified a big issue within the banking sector where the data for minority are not captured. And this also was highlighted in a report that was published by Harvard University last year, where they identify a big issue in terms of coding and a logarithm that has been a subject to, and is driven by AI in terms of how applications are being. So quite often when someone applies for a loan in the bank, they tell you, or the computer says no. So when you ask the question, okay,
Eugene, I'm so sorry. Just you have used up your 7 minutes. So do you want to quickly like to say?
So I was talking about the data, and then the final one thing I find within the African and Black communities, how do we do the established bankable businesses that has built the credit worthiness to be able to access and attract investment. So I hope I give you a bit of in terms of.
Thank you. You met the brief completely. That was really very succinct and very interesting. And remember to switch the timer off next time to myself. So thank you so much. Now we do, if anybody would like, we do have time for a question. If anybody has a particularly pressing question they'd like to ask at this point. Anna, I'm not sure if anybody's put their hand up to ask a question. Was that Anna?
I can ask a question, Jacqueline, whether you want to take it now or at the end of the session. Yes. You mentioned a number of points there, Eugene, which was really interesting. I'm from the Lending Standards Board. We're a primary self-regulatory body for the banking and lending industry. And I was quite interested to know, like, there's been a lot of work that has taken place in this space, like reports and underline what some of the issues are that these communities face. So I wondered whether you could, or the panel might want to answer, what is that first step? What is it that is holding back that progress? Because we're in the midst of doing a report to try and build collaboration with the financial services in these communities to actually try to break down some of these barriers. So what would you say is the 1 or 2 key steps that need to be taken to try and bridge this gap? Because a lot of research and work has been done in this space, but the issue still remains. So what would you say are those key steps that need to be taken that really will help to accelerate and progress this? You touched on a number, but what is it that's holding it up, do you think?
I think one of the key issues, I've seen a few reports from like Lloyds Bank, CREME, and NatWest, and a few other one, FSB, and all those. One of the key issues, they tend to interview the same audience. So there's a lot of audience being recycled around. So the research is not going far enough to capture wider audience. The second thing, of course, writing a report is good, but it's about taking practical action to implement the outcomes. And I think Monder agreed with me that we especially on the new report, is about what do we do with the outcomes? Because each year, yes, everyone is doing a research, writing a report, and then they put it in another report to another report. The issues remain the same. The issues that were identified 10 years ago are still remain the same now. So some of those research, I don't find it identifying anything new than what we don't know. So it's about
sorry, Anna, Eugene, I'm so sorry. What I'm going to do, if it's okay, is actually bring on our next panelist, and then I'd invite each panelist to perhaps at the end of their presentation, if other questions don't come forward, to actually address that point as well, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Super, thank you. So I'd like to invite Emma now to share her insight with us.
Thank you, Jacqueline, and hello everyone. My name is Emma Banyane. I'm the soon-to-be CEO of OneTech, currently Managing Director, as we finalise our spin-out from Capital Enterprise. And at OneTech, what we do is we help connect underserved communities to the network, skills and confidence to start and sustain their businesses. So essentially our vision is an inclusive ecosystem, tech startup ecosystem, I should note, where everyone has equal access and opportunity to innovate, succeed and thrive. Personally, I've been involved in tech startups or tech really over the last 18 years. And I started my career initially working in corporates in a very technical capacity before kind of building a startup myself and going through a lot of the challenges or journeys that a lot of founders go through, raising money, capital, and luckily we were able to gain a small exit after 6 years of that. After that, I then got involved with Capital Enterprise, and actually the background to OneTech is that Capital Enterprise is a membership organisation with a key sort of ambition to help the UK be one of the best places to start and grow business. It's a not-for-profit that does this. They run, I should say, because I'm about to spin out, lots of different programs, a lot of ecosystem development in different regions and so forth. And they actually did a survey of their membership to understand what the biggest challenges were. And one of the biggest challenges that came out more than 5 years ago, 6 years ago, was this issue of DE&I within the tech startup ecosystem. And at that time, the only real data that was available was around female entrepreneurship, and actually the fact that, our male counterparts might go out and make up, I think, something like 91% at the time of all VC funding in the UK. So with that main challenge as the problem we were going after, that's how OneTech was born back in 2018. Over that period, we've supported over 3,000 startups, and those startups have gone on to raise around just in excess of 20 million, creating 200 jobs. Now, what I want to kind of talk about before I go into the key recommendations is some of the learnings that we've actually encountered over that 5-year period. So as I mentioned, when we first started, we kind of just took a lot of mainstream programs that were out there, investment readiness programs, the general programs that are usually out there. And our main aim was how can we diversify the pipeline of entrepreneurs that go onto these programs? And what we found was that a lot of the founders that were going through our programs were much earlier on and had very different needs to the solutions that we had. So as an entrepreneur, we hadn't done enough research, I would say, to actually understand that. And even though we ended up smashing our targets, we ended up, meeting all of our sort of money raised and jobs creation targets, we actually had an amazing woman, Dr. Angela D from Loughborough, London, sort of lead on the impact research of our program. And one of the biggest things that maybe came out of that was this, was the Matthew effect, that actually they weren't consistent and equal outcomes of all of the founders that went through our programs. So yeah, a majority of them got value out of OneTech and credited OneTech, but there were some people that essentially maybe would have been able to access funding and other resources without us. But there were people maybe on the fringes who, on the fringes of, Hackney or Islington, at the heart of sort of Silicon Roundabout, as they say in Old Street, that weren't able to access some of those opportunities. And a lot of that came down to maybe confidence, mindset, not access to the language, not feeling really part of it. So we essentially went on a transformation ourselves as an organisation, and then we really got into the hood and realised that we needed to create really custom and personalised routes through to navigate the ecosystem, as well as the creation of new programs that really met entrepreneurs where they were at. So now we've got other programs like Bootstrap School and Build an App in 12 Weeks, no code solutions to actually build that. So for me, in terms of recommendations, I'll just go through these because I know I don't have a lot of time, but really just there's a need to not provide solutions through a homogenized lens, right? That intersection is incredibly important. We did research into Black female founders in London, for example, from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, and found that, some of the key challenges might be around time, that actually some people might have caring responsibilities, whether that's other members of family and actually how can you provide time management skills or things like that will help them to access, to build out more time for their startups. Another big challenge was around actually taking an ecosystem approach to tackling this problem. So don't just look at how can we diversify the pipeline or how can we provide different solutions, but also challenging incumbents, funding, investors, etc., to actually innovate themselves and provide different offers, because not all entrepreneurs even have the same goal. A lot of the founders we found, that even though they said they were on a growth path, for them growth meant, you know, getting secondary income. Not everybody wants the same thing or has the same ambitions. Also, and not everyone wants to become a unicorn, and that narrative needs to change as well. You know, a lot of that is pushed by the media and what success looks like, or success is raising money. But actually, that's just part of the journey, and it's part of the journey for some people. And then a couple of other small things, just around actually, how can we share those failures and learnings more as organisations that support diverse founders, so that we can actually provide shorter feedback loops, share those learnings, build out new programs, and share those with each other. And actually, the last considerations around time, that actually it isn't a quick fix as well, right? This is something that's going to take time, and actually building that into whether that's policies or whether that's programs, but knowing that this is a long-term journey that we're on.
Thank you so much. You're under time, Emma. Well done. So, I mean, again, a really succinct summarising of what the key issues are from your perspective. And it's really interesting to see the themes that are developing here. And I know Colette's going to pick up on this at the end. But it is interesting that what I'm hearing is the ecosystem time and time again, and perhaps a move away from a silo approach to this, which is really refreshing to hear. Equally, some of the things that I'm hearing, and it's wonderful to have Anna on with us this afternoon, and if there is chance later to perhaps reference one of the early reports that looked at disability and the impact that has had. So it's quite interesting to see, you know, everybody's, you know, not another debate, not another report, and actually to see some actual action taking place. So hopefully we might have an opportunity to do that later. Okay, if there are any questions before I move on to our next panelist. I'm not seeing any, so I'd like to invite Monder, please.
Thanks, Jacqueline, and it's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon for a webinar that's addressing, I think, a critical issue. I particularly appreciate the framing of this webinar, which talks about innovation and entrepreneurship. Too often when we talk about this agenda, there's an othering effect, as ethnic minority entrepreneurship or women's business is something else from the mainstream. I think the whole debate needs to be reconfigured to look at how central diversity is to innovation, the whole process of innovation and entrepreneurship. So I particularly appreciate the framing of it, and that framing of the argument, changing the narrative and getting a sort of granular appreciation of the contribution that different communities make has been a central concern of the centre that I run, the Centre for Research in Ethnic Minority Entrepreneurship, which is 20 years old, and I've been working on this agenda for even longer, over 30 years. And during that time, one of the key challenges has been bringing the evidence to bear on policy, really getting an informed perspective on the challenges and taking action that flows from that perspective. What I'll quickly mention is how we've tried to address that. We've tried to address that in our most recent report, which is called Time to Change, Advancing UK's Ethnic Minority Businesses, which was published last year, which is a synthesis of over 3 decades of research in this area, but also a real keen eye on what actually works. And it's been received buy-in from financial institutions, but equally grassroots community activists as well. And you've asked us, Jacqueline, to address 3 questions about about 3 things we'd like to see. And we've actually fleshed out, identified 10 recommendations in the report. I don't intend to go through all of them, but I will stick to the brief, which is identifying what I think are the 3 key elements that we believe are necessary to effect a step change in supporting Black and ethnic minority entrepreneurship in the UK. And the first one is a focus on growth, growing diverse enterprises. That's been a particular challenge. The Black and ethnic minority entrepreneurs haven't had a problem with startup or aspiration. For over 2 decades, they've been twice as likely to start an enterprise than their mainstream counterparts. It's the issue of growth, because in the first 3.5 years, that's where the problem lies. Because after 3.5 years, if you're white, you're twice as likely to be running an established or growth business than your ethnic minority counterparts. So the position flips, and we don't know why. That's a challenge. And we think we need to focus on growth, because if you do, the rewards are significant. Because for Black and ethnic minority firms that do last longer than 3.5 years, they're more likely to grow, innovate, and trade overseas than their white counterparts. Yet in the sort of UK PLC's business support offer, it's pretty light on growth. And I think Emma's point is well taken. Growth is important, but there is this sort of obsession with identifying the next unicorn. I can see where that's coming from. I'm sympathetic towards it, but not at the expense of identifying the varying contributions that different kinds of firms make to the economy and how they fit in, particularly local and regional and national ecosystems. It's important that we don't lose sight of that. So really, an informed perspective on growth is the first thing I'd like to see. Second, and is the issue of access to finance, and I'll tackle head on the point that Anna made. Access to finance is a recurring issue for Black and ethnic minority entrepreneurs. There have been many debates on it. We did the first major study on this for the then British Bankers Association in the year 2000. It's still ongoing. What we argue is that the key issue is one of discouragement. If you're an ethnic minority business owner, you're probably twice as likely to be discouraged from wanting to raise finance than your white counterparts, twice as likely. That's an incredible statistic. And when we're talking about discouragement, we're talking about bankable propositions, good businesses who aren't going through the process because they fear they'll be treated negatively. And we also made a calculation: if we were to eradicate the discouragement problem, 25% of the beneficiaries will be Black and ethnic minority entrepreneurs, yet they only comprise 4% of the business stock. There's a key challenge there for the banks, and the solution, we say, and this speaks to Anna's point, is the banks, financial providers really need to have a well thought through, proactive approach to engagement. Many banks are doing this now, whether it's done on a sustained basis and as part of business as usual, rather than a one-off activity. That remains to be seen. But I think that's the second key point. And the third key point is really to have a handle on what we're talking about, ethnic minority businesses or women-owned businesses. I think, Jacqueline, you're quite right to mention the point of intersectionality. Our data on these issues is pretty poor. I mean, we've gathered the best possible data available on ethnic minority entrepreneurs, and we identified that if you do calculate and if you do implement the recommendations that we say, the benefit to the economy will be of the magnitude of 100 billion. It's 25 billion now, but if you implement our recommendations, it'll be 100 billion. But that could be a massive underestimate because the quality of the data is pretty poor. Eugene's mentioned some issues with the banks, but equally, I think the government needs to take a lead. It needs to be at the forefront of identifying, getting a satisfactory definition of what an ethnic minority business is. It needs to make sure that the databases it uses, for example, for tax purposes, captures this data, and that it needs to send a lead to the corporate sector. And it's not just the banks, there's a number of different organizations that need to be incorporated in this space. So those are the 3 areas that we think we should focus on, and those inform the 10 recommendations that we believe, if implemented, could constitute a real step change in respect of this agenda. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Monder. And again, I'm just going to make sure I start the timer, it doesn't interrupt. Succinct, and as you say, that there's been so much work done in this area, and I think what is needed now is that clarity. And a pathway to the impactfulness that could come from that. And it's also when it's interesting again how we're seeing as we go through these different debates recurring themes across the different areas in respect of barriers that people are facing if they try to innovate and create enterprise. Thank you. So just before I bring the next panelist in, could I see if anybody does have a question? I'm sure there might be some at the end. I can't see everybody, so if there is anybody that I'm not seeing, if you could indicate in some way, and then I'm sure all might pick that up. Okay, all right, thank you. I'm now going to invite Fiona, am I pronouncing this correctly? Fiona Morrill?
Yeah, that's right. Thank you, Jacqueline.
From the British Business Bank. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you so much to Jacqueline, Helen and team for organising today's session and for posing what I think we all agree is such an important question at a really critical time for smaller businesses across the UK. So as Jacqueline mentioned, I'm Fiona Morrill and I focus on researching diversity and inclusion in access to finance at the economics team at the British Business Bank. So this question is a really important one for us as an organisation. So we're the UK's economic development bank and we work really closely with government and finance providers to help smaller businesses access finance. So two of our key objectives are backing innovation, so ensuring businesses can access the capital they need to start and scale, and also unlocking the potential of entrepreneurs regardless of who they are and where they're based. So as Eugene elaborated on, innovation can be really broad and that's how we look at it as well. So it can include developing new processes, goods or services, and reaching new markets, which we know minority entrepreneurs are really effective at. And important research by Monder and organisations like the FSB has shone a real light on the key contribution that innovative minority-led businesses make to the UK's economy. So we see this as a great opportunity to help entrepreneurs access the funding they need and one that will create important commercial, economic and employment gains for the UK. So through our report Alone Together, which we again collaborated with Monder on, and our annual Small Business Finance Markets report, we've highlighted the barriers that ambitious and innovative minority-led businesses face when it comes to accessing finance. And that includes, as Monder said, from being discouraged from applying for finance in the first place, right through to the barriers that they actually do face when applying for and securing the funding that they need. So these challenges in accessing the right finance for their business at the right time then make it harder for underserved entrepreneurs to invest in their businesses, with many ultimately forced to draw on what they have available in personal funds, which may not be a lot for some minority entrepreneurs. So our research shows that particular challenges are faced by female ethnic minority entrepreneurs, particularly those from low income or disadvantaged socioeconomic backgrounds as well. So that issue around intersectionality is a really important one and does lead to systemic disadvantage occurring. So we know the UK has this really strong pipeline of ambitious entrepreneurial talent amongst minority groups. And the question we're grappling with is how do we unlock their innovative potential? So our forthcoming research, which is called Finding What Works, that we've done in partnership with Monder and SQW's research team, explores the actions that venture capitalists and their funders can take to improve their investment into minority founders, recognising that this is a responsibility that finance providers, including the British Business Bank, have in unlocking potential amongst these founders. So here we think the bank can play a key role both in terms of research and also our experience as an investor into the market. So we know that equity finance and venture capital play a key role in backing innovative, high-growth young businesses, but there's also a reliance on networks, warm introductions, and a lack of track record in the industry, which often makes this source of funding inaccessible to many. So we think that solutions to encourage innovation amongst minority businesses must address those fundamental barriers. Our research points to the importance of diversity amongst decision makers and those who are sourcing the deals. And we know from our own research and our role as an investor ourselves that diverse investment teams and committees do play a key role in encouraging diversity amongst the founders that end up being funded. So the research also points to the importance of collecting and monitoring data, which I think has been a key theme in today's discussion. So we think this is really critical in informing better policy and decision making amongst industry and government. So on our side, we're improving data collection on gender and ethnicity in our own lending and investment portfolios, and also the evaluations of our programs that we do as well, and making sure we have a diversity and inclusion lens on those. We also run the venture capital arm of the Investing in Women Code, with the findings being published last week, where signatories share their data on the gender split of their investments, with many voluntarily sharing their ethnicity data too. So that's relevant to Eugene's point about getting the industry more involved with reporting their ethnicity data. And we'll publish the findings of that work later this year. But we do recognise that there's a lot more to be done on this, particularly when it comes to characteristics beyond gender and ethnicity. For example, disability and caring roles, as Emma mentioned, can have an impact on access to finance and innovation. Our Startup Loans programme is particularly effective at reaching underserved entrepreneurs, and it offers individual loans alongside business support. So another kind of key area that we've been looking at is the role that limited partners and investors can play in encouraging funds to improve their diversity and inclusion. So we're collecting more information on our potential delivery partners approach to D&I, and organisations that score highly on this, along with teams made up of individuals from diverse backgrounds, will be viewed more favourably in our procurement. So we're trying to internalise some of those benefits and build that into our approach as well. Feedback from one of our evaluations found that our own approach to diversity and inclusion encouraged the fund managers that we work with to consider their own strategy as well. So that was a really encouraging finding. And we also recognise the role that other organisations play in the ecosystem too. So accelerators can help investors access a wider range of talent, as well as providing support to minority entrepreneurs. And organisations like Innovate UK support innovative businesses at the start of their journey and help them access the funding escalator. So to kind of sum up, I know I've covered a lot of different areas there, but I think 3 key things that we think are really crucial in accelerating innovation amongst minority-led businesses are, firstly, that organisations make a commitment to reflect and support diversity, equity and inclusion in their senior and decision-making teams. So setting the direction from the top, I think that's really important. And we've seen the benefits of that with our own portfolio. Secondly, improving the information available to minority entrepreneurs who are looking to innovate and grow their businesses. For example, there's initiatives like the Innovation Hub, which provide targeted information and guides for innovative founders. And then thirdly, to go back to that key theme around data and accountability, collecting and reporting on ethnicity data and other characteristics as well more broadly will inform and improve decision-making and policy making. So that's a really crucial area to improve on as well. And then lastly, if anyone is interested in looking at our Finding What Works research, we'll be publishing that on the 5th of July. So please do take a look when that's out and get in touch with me if you have any further questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fiona. And again, it's just so refreshing to hear some of the practical measures that are being put in place by the British Business Bank. And again, hopefully through the debate today and things that might follow, that can only improve. Because we do hear time and time again, there's been a lot of work, a lot of discussion, but it is really nice to see some things starting to go forward. We've got a little bit more time than we anticipate at this point, so I'm just wondering if there are any further questions, and if not, if everybody's okay with it, I'd just like to bring Anna in for just a few minutes on this.
Jacqueline, I've probably got another question actually, if that's okay. I don't mean to dominate the questions at the moment. I found this really, really interesting. So thanks very much for sharing all of the information and giving me the opportunity to ask a couple of questions. But something that we found is around the data isn't there as well, Fiona, and you were talking about that. So it's quite difficult to measure actually. But then as all of you were talking, I was thinking about, well, what does success look like? Obviously, it looks like greater inclusion. But one of the areas that firms grapple with is, how do we measure success? So what kind of things can we do or talk about that help to measure the success of the activities that they're doing, that you can then communicate, I suppose, back out into the communities, to then hopefully create this cycle of more people being able to access the finance that they perhaps need or the support that they need, and that creating that cyclical reward for everybody, essentially. But I just wondered what success looks like, because Emma, I think you spoke about outcomes earlier. We're an outcomes regulator. Outcomes look different for different people. A good outcome, I should say. Bad outcomes also look different, but we want to go for the positive ones. So good outcomes look different. So do you have any ideas around what measuring success in this space can look like? And I'm happy for whoever has got any ideas to sort of answer that if you can.
Perhaps if Monder, you might start.
Yeah, sure. That's a really important and challenging question. And I mean, I think, and we don't ask that often enough. I think implicitly, sometimes on this agenda, let's say I speak about ethnic minority business success has just been equated a number of startups in a really crude way, and that's it. And that has been some of our we've criticised that approach because it doesn't take into account the quality, durability of businesses, and for many minorities, starting a business is a reaction to a disadvantage. It's not an indicator of success. In fact, lower self-employment rates could be a sign of success because that means they'll get jobs in high-paid jobs elsewhere. So I think we've got to be careful. Having said that, we're sort of agonizing over this issue now because we want to implement the 10 recommendations that we've made, and we're asking ourselves exactly that question, Anna. So one of them, and by the end of summer, and we'll be happy to share this, we'll be setting out some metrics that we're going to use to measure our success. One of those could be, how many sort of startups do we pull through to the growth stage? So that could be a sort of an element that we look into. I mean, I think one of our other recommendations is about supply chains, but again, the monitoring of supply chains is very patchy. So, what's the percentage spend on diverse businesses? Most organisations, large organisations, wouldn't know. What would you expect? What would good look like? How many should you be buying from? I don't think any large organisations asks that question. It's well established in other countries. We're a super diverse country, and Birmingham is a majority minority city. It seems quite a sensible question to ask, and we don't ask that question. And another one that I'm really particularly keen on is looking at the social value of businesses, and that this speaks to, I think, Emma's point about the different contributions. So there's some fabulous research that looks at high streets, and most policymakers would write off the corner shop, write off the smaller businesses that often minorities run. But in research that other scholars have taken, which looks at the contribution of high streets, they found that businesses are there over 2 or 3 generations, 30, 40 years, speak a variety of different languages, employ family and non-family workers, contribute rates much more than sort of out-of-town shopping centres. Again, it depends on what metrics you use and what perspective you have on their role in the economy. And so being quite trying to sort of work out the role of these businesses, the social contribution as well as the economic metrics, is as important to this discussion. And I think very necessary, given now the real emphasis people are making about identifying these gazelles, these uniforms, these high growth. And I can see the rationale for that, but there aren't that many, and supporting them doesn't necessarily lead to inclusive growth as well.
Resolve the issue.
Thank you, Monder. Sorry, I'm just going to interject there. So it's a really it's like the question that everybody wants like the answer to, and sometimes in the network we talk about this. We'll talk about as simple as work that's good for you. So each entrepreneur will be doing whatever they're doing for their own reasons and for their own, whether it be monetary, family, health, well-being, or whatever. And the critical thing here is actually to get the removal of the barriers, whatever that outcome might be. And equally for us as a society, and I love Monder bringing that in, to actually value that, whatever that actually outcome is, and this area is just so rich in its breadth of information and lack of data in different things, but there's so much more to learn, and we're only going to start learning when these kind of recommendations are implemented. I'm really sorry, because what I'm going to have to do now is bring in our discuss it. But please, if there's anything you want to put into the chat, and I'm sure there's going to be some really good connections made here today. I'm going to introduce Colette Henry now, please, our discussant. Thank you.
Thanks, Jacqueline. And it's been fascinating listening to the panel, you know, and thanks everyone for sharing your insights. I'm delighted just to take a few minutes just to share a few reflections. What struck me was that a lot of the comments made today, a lot of points that were highlighted as critical to this agenda, were similar to some of the points that came out of a report I was involved in 2021 with the OECD. So it was the OECD in collaboration with the Global Women's Entrepreneurship Research Network. And we looked at policy, entrepreneurship policy through a gender lens. And although focusing on women, a lot of the findings from that report were reflected here this morning. I mean, for example, Eugene talked about demystifying the meaning of innovation. And then alongside that, there was this notion of demystifying growth as well. And those are two things that can be quite alien to women, can be quite alien to minority groups. And as Monder said, we need to get a granular appreciation, I love that phrase, of, you know, the contribution that minority groups can make to the economy. And how can we do that if their understanding of terms like innovation and growth are completely different? I think there is a sense in the literature, isn't there, that innovation and entrepreneurship, especially growth-oriented innovation and entrepreneurship, is almost the prerogative of the traditional entrepreneur, the male, white, probably national and probably privileged. Minority groups have a completely different understanding of these things. And the speakers this morning, I think, highlighted the lack of dedicated innovation supports for minority groups. There is a need, as the speakers highlighted, to understand the intersectionality aspects, to understand the cultural differences and how ethnic minorities and minority groups tell their stories. I think just to maybe not take up too much time, I hope that there might be some time for another couple of questions for the panel, but just to maybe give you some of my thoughts, the three things that perhaps I would suggest really need to be done. And this is coming from the background perhaps of women's entrepreneurship, but really they do apply across the board to minority groups. And the first one, as has been highlighted by the speakers, is a no-brainer, which is really this need to include members of diversity in the actual decision-making body of programs. So at the program design stage, at the program delivery stage, we need to include people from the program target group. So if minority groups are the target group for supports, they need to be involved at that stage of the programs. The second point I'd make is that we need to stop viewing minority groups as perhaps the other or lacking in something, just as the way the literature has viewed women entrepreneurs for quite some time. They're lacking in something, they're not as good as, they need to be fixed. This is totally ridiculous because there's a lack of understanding of what minority groups can offer to the economy and what their different needs are. So we need to start nurturing that. And I think finally, something that's come onto the agenda quite recently is this need for evaluation. There isn't enough evaluation of programs. We don't know if they work or if they don't. And sometimes we end up getting programs being repeated that aren't very good, or programs being disbanded that are actually quite effective. And alongside that, I would suggest that in terms of inclusivity, we start to look at some way of inclusivity proofing programs and supports before they're rolled out. Now, there are some checklists and grids that have started to develop. I would note the work by Barbara Orser and Catherine Elliott in Canada. And these are some sort of just first steps that can be applied to programs that we can check whether or not they're inclusive enough before we roll them out. So I'll leave that with you to think about, and I'll hand back to Jacqueline. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Colette. That was a really, again, another succinct summary, and I think did capture our panelists' thoughts very, very well. So thank you so much. We've got another 8 minutes, I think, before we end our session. I would like to open the floor again to some questions if anybody does have any further questions. If not, I'd like to pose one myself, but we'll see if you've got anybody.
Yeah, there's actually a question in the chat from Helen for Emma. So Helen's just said that she's interested in the regional dimension that Emma mentioned. How much does the importance of place inform thinking on what you each do? For example, Monder mentioned Birmingham, as did Eugene.
Maybe I can come in on that one. Yeah, it really does. I mean, place is extremely important, right? It's another intersectional aspect that you need to take into account on. So for us, I talked a little bit earlier about the fact that we've recently done some work in Liverpool and Leeds, and we're going to be doing hopefully some stuff in West Yorkshire more broadly. But diversity means, different things in different regions. So, for example, in Liverpool, maybe in London, there is more of a lens on different ethnic minorities, whereas in Liverpool, it might be more of a lens into social economic and other factors. And so for us, it means designing programs slightly differently. It might mean that we bring a slightly different program into that area. So we've been recently partnered with a new organisation called Baltic Ventures, who are going to be a new sort of pre-seed fund in the Liverpool City region. And so one of the things that was important was to, yes, there's going to be 50k checks available for 10 founders or businesses over the next 5 years. Sorry, each year over the next 5 years. We need to think about actually how can we capacity build in Liverpool City region and hopefully attract more funding into the region, but also make sure that it isn't predominantly people from outside of the region that are going to gain access to that. So how can we build up founders there? So we've had to go into that particular area with like intervention that is maybe really kind of like entry level stuff that we do so that we can support, and so that over the next few years, diverse founders from that area are able to access those types of opportunities. But
Thank you, Emma. Sorry, and I'm sorry. I hate having to cut you short. It's just time-wise, because that's just so important. And what I'm really loving about what you're bringing out from that as well, and again, this is just being echoed across the debate today. This reinforcement of perhaps a move away within that ecosystem from something that was done for or to, but something that's actually done in collaboration with, and even more importantly, led by, because perhaps that's the way we're going to really get an accurate reflection here of what the people that are affected actually want, and that they lead on it. Okay, all right, thank you. I'm just going to now invite Helen, Professor Lawton-Smith, to actually just conclude our session today. I'm sure she's got lots of thanks. Oh, actually, I've just seen another question come in, actually. I'm sorry if somebody did put the hand up. Helen, is it time to take this one question? I hadn't seen it, sorry. Is it Darren?
Yes, it's Dr. Potter from OECD. Yeah.
Thank you. If you'd like to ask your question, please. Oh, you're muted.
Yes, something that we struggle with is whether it's better to go for tailored, dedicated programs to tackle these issues, or whether it's better to try and sort of go into the mainstream programs and change the way that they function. So is the answer here to have a set of access to finance initiatives for different sections of the ethnic minority population, or do we sort of not push that route, but go more into making sure that all the mainstream programs are sensitive to those factors?
Is there anybody particular? I don't know if actually Helen might comment on this in respect to some research that might be coming out quite soon, but perhaps if anybody from the panel would like to respond to that initially. And could I just check beforehand, are we okay to go over slightly, or are we going to actually get cut off at 2?
I think we should try to aim at 2, but
Okay.
if somebody wants to answer Jonathan's question.
Thank you.
I'll go, if that's okay. Yeah, I think it's a really important question, and it's something we're grappling with within the British Business Bank ourselves as well. So typically the way that these market gaps for minority entrepreneurs have been addressed in the past is to create a particular program or a form of kind of targeting that audience. But as some of the other panelists have said, you know, maybe not necessarily thinking about or involving those that we're targeting in the design of those programs. And I think as well, what we found is that take up of those programs has been quite low. And I'd say it maybe permeates the point that Monder made around seeing those groups as the other as well. So I think it's definitely very much kind of striking the right balance. You know, some of those groups will have potential needs that need to be addressed through targeted programs. But on the other hand, I think it's also important to ensure that more broadly our wider programs do also incorporate diversity and inclusion elements as well. So it's a bit of both, I think, but it is a delicate balancing act, I think.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll go back to you, Helen, please.
Yes, well, thank you for a brilliant panel. What's been really interesting is how you've listened to each other and picked up on each other's points. Everybody's referenced other people. Jacqueline's referenced everybody, and it's nice to have Anna here as well. So it's just been an absolute brilliant debate, and I'm so glad it's been recorded, and we'll have a transcript of it, and I can try and make a sensible blog out of it. But yeah, thank you all. It's been absolutely excellent and really informative. And we talked at a pre-event meeting about what we do after this. So one of the challenges is we have these kind of meetings, we come up with these conclusions, but I think one of the things that's been coming out of this, and the question that Jacqueline posed, is what we do next. And I think this dialogue is part of decisions or informing decisions on what we do next. And we will come back to you and see what we can do as a consequence of whether you've learned anything new from each other that will help inform your thinking, or whether we have new partnerships developing from the panels and recommendations from other people to join in these dialogues. So thank you all very much, and it's been brilliant. And thank you very much, Ola, for organising it all.
Yes, thank you very much, Ola.
And thank you everybody for attending and joining in with us. So, okay, thank you.